match 6. The numbers are 47, 12.
You're going to task them with not only registering somebody to vote, but now it is this confirmation of official documents that again, you've got a new private right of action and criminal penalties that could be imposed if you're not doing this right. So states can also continue to designate other government, other non-government offices as voter registration offices. But if any of these, but only, so you've got to agree to do that. And again, you've got resource challenges, okay, but this issue that then comes with this new private right of action to a low-level employee who may be working in a one-person office handling state public assistance, it's a concern that you have the ability to not only put an additional requirement to them, an additional responsibility that comes with certain liability, and also the state's looking to how are we training these folks, or are we going to hire new folks to help facilitate at any of these agencies. So I show you the stars. In most other states, you'd be looking at how all these stars connect through a road. These three here are connected by a road. This one connects to this one by a road. That's it. That's it. So I've got 83% of Alaska's communities. This is 20% of our total population. So again, you know, there's not a lot of people out here, but you know what? These folks have been here for a long time. Many of them indigenous people in native villages that have been there for generations, millennia, they say. So getting to the practical realities of forcing Alaskans to present documentation in order to vote, and the requirement that you have to present in one of 6 regional locations, possibly another location in the state. This is not only a logistical challenge, but it presents a fiscal challenge. And I heard, again, the argument by my colleague from Utah that we're not asking for fees to vote, but in order to get me to go, like, let's start. I'm 18 years old. I want to register to vote. How am I going to do that? I was born down here in Ketchikan. There's no star in Ketchikan. Now, there is a DMV in Ketchikan, so maybe I could start my application there in Ketchikan, but I'm still going to have to go to Juneau to go present my documentation. All of Southeast, there's no roads down there. There is a ferry. It's 20 hours from Ketchikan up to Juneau there. Or I take the Alaska Airlines jet. It's only an hour. But, I don't know, it's $420 to get me from here to there. If I am in Fairbanks, where I went to school, okay, I've got the ability to present my documentation there. But if I'm in any of these North Slope communities here, this is where I have to fly to present my original documentation. If I happen to live here in Kotzebue, big town, I've got to fly here to Nome to present my documentation. If I live here in this Bethel community over here, I'm going all the way to Anchorage to present my documentation. So you're moving around, you're flying. You're flying to all these places. So this is going to be hard, this is going to be costly on Alaskans. And again, these are people who are eligible to vote, they're citizens of our country, but if they're looking at a situation where I'm going to have to spend $1,000 to get me to where I can present my documentation to vote, they're not going to do it. They may do it. There will be many who will do it. Let me say that. There will be many who will do it because these are proud Alaskans, they're proud Americans, and they want to vote. But this is hard. This is hard. And so I fear that they won't register because financially they won't be able to register. And if they're not able to register, they can't vote. And while disenfranchisement may not be the intent of the Save America Act, and I don't think that it is, I think that we will see that. In fact, I fully expect it to be an outcome of this. So I'm going to give you some specific examples. This is a St. Lawrence Island. It's a little bit closer to Russia than it is to mainland Alaska, but there's great Alaskans that live out there. I've been out there many times. So if you're a 17-year-old girl who lives in Savunga, you're turning 18 in October. Super excited because you're going to be able to vote for the first time ever. So what's this young person going to have to do in order to register to vote? So she's going to have to book a flight to Nome. So it's not that far, but it's all across water. There's no boats that take you there. But that flight, we don't have jets out of St. Lawrence Island, so it's a prop jet. It's going to cost you $720 just to start. The flights, if there's one a day, you're lucky, that's good. But you're going to have to stay overnight because you can't return on the same day. There aren't a lot of hotels in Nome. A night at the Aurora Inn is $310, but I would guess that since the Iditarod is going on right now and there's lots of excitement there, it's probably a little over $310. But then you add in food for the day, cab fare, you're probably looking at at least $1,000. At least $1,000 for a quick day trip to go to Nome, to register so that you can present your documentation so that you have the privilege to vote. And keep in mind, in my example, I'm a 17-year-old girl, super excited about turning 18 and being able to vote, but I don't have $1,000. And the people in the village, fishing village of Savunga, or in the other community of Gamble, they don't make this kind of money. So this is probably the best case scenario for flying in and out of Savunga because you got weather that hits all the time. And again, you're not in a jet, you're taking a prop. You can get weathered in or out. Your trip can last several days. Storms blow in, you're stuck there, you can't move for a week or so. This is not uncommon. And so it adds, and I feel like these stories are important because, well, my example of a young 17-year-old who's excited to vote, there's no name, I haven't talked to such a person, but these are the scenarios that people live with when your state is geographically blessed. I was going to say challenged, but I think we're blessed with our geography. So you're saying, okay, Lisa, that's an extreme example because that's a big island out in the middle of the big ocean, but other places that are more connected, it's not that bad. Let's go to the largest fishing community in Alaska, and the fishing community that brings in more fish per volume than any place else, Unalaska. So we're sitting out here. We're right at the end here because, once again, we're so geographically blessed we can't have a map that actually shows that the Aleutians go all the way out here. So you're in Unalaska. Say you're a fisherman or a teacher. The flight to Anchorage, because this is where you're going to have to go. You're going to have to go into Anchorage. 800 air miles. 800 air miles. The cost one way right now, if you can get a seat, is somewhere between $1,100 per seat if you can maybe get on a charter to possibly as much as $1,300. This is one way. This is one way to get you from here to there. Now, granted, this is crab season going on, and so the tickets, you're not able to get many seats, but that's what we're talking about. So you've got over $1,000 just to get you there. Then you get to.
Good morning, everyone. You are watching live now from Fox. We appreciate all our viewers continuing to join us. You saw there on the screen, we are moments away from seeing President Trump and the Japanese Prime Minister for dinner. People are already sitting. We'll be keeping an eye on this shot. Let's take a 2-minute break, and we'll be back with more. Welcome back, everyone, to Live Now from Fox. Moments away from bringing you more coverage from inside the White House. Soon, President Trump will be hosting dinner for Japan's Prime Minister, and you can see a podium set up, so we will be hearing some remarks coming up in just a moment. You see the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and others seated right near that podium. So as soon as we see the President and the Prime Minister, we will bring that to you on Live Now from Fox. In the meantime, more from live coverage here on the Senate floor. Let's listen in.
I got to have a certified copy of my birth certificate. So I've mentioned that just the logistics, the sheer logistics of trying to satisfy the requirements of the law when it comes to registration. So costly to get yourself there. And it is costly to secure the documents that you need to prove citizenship in the first place. It's been mentioned that passports are $130. Applications take 4 to 6 weeks, unless you're paying an expedite fee. We've got pretty good statistics in Alaska when it comes to those who actually have a passport. About 50% of Alaskans have one. Getting a certified copy of your birth certificate or marriage certificate. It's not free. That's $30. One of the problems that we found, though, in Alaska right now is our Vital Records Department for the whole state has a notice on their website that says that there's a processing time of 1 to 2 months. So, for instance, if I'm coming out of Ketchikan here, and I want to I want to go to Juneau, fly to Juneau, so I can present my documentation. If I've got a copy of my birth certificate, but it's not certified, I'm either going to have to fly back to Ketchikan to see if it's possible to get one there, or I can go to Vital Statistics, but then I'm told you got to wait a couple months, perhaps. So now I've spent $420, and I'm still not registered to vote. So I've shared how challenging it is to meet the requirements with really no advanced lead time to transition, to allow for the states to stand these up. It has been mentioned before that the challenges that women have. Name changes. I've talked to women in domestic violence shelters who have shared with me that one of the scary things about their situation is knowing that the abuser in a domestic violence situation continues to hold the papers that will allow them to move about. So whether it is a birth certificate, whether it is a passport, whether it is a tribal ID card. In Alaska, we've got an estimated 155,000 female citizens aged 15 years and older who have names that don't match their birth certificates due to a host of different reasons. It's been fascinating with this whole discussion, the number of conversations that I have had with women, including myself, where we talk about how hard it was to get real ID because name change, there's been a hyphen, you can't match up all of the documentations. Again, is it impossible? No. Is it going to be really challenging? Absolutely yes. So I've talked about the registration part of that. Let's assume now you are registered to vote. Now, SAVE Act is going to require new photo ID with specifics attached to it. So it's not only a photo ID, it has to have an expiration date on it. So you've got to have this to vote. I've said, I support voter ID. Alaska requires ID to vote, as I think they should. But I think what we have here is a very prescriptive approach to it. And again, my fear is that it would result in disenfranchising voters who have been voting for decades, and simply because they can't produce a piece of ID with a photo on it. So there's been a lot of discussion about tribal IDs, and don't they qualify? They qualify for you to go through TSA, but the Act requires that you have a photo ID that has an expiration to it. And most tribal IDs do not have an expiration date to them. Some of them do not have photos. So it would be a significant challenge to so many in our, not only in Alaska, but within the lower 48 as well. Others are saying, well, if what you need is just a photo ID, you can have a state ID, you can have your driver's license. Keep in mind, in most of these communities, the 20% of Alaskans who do not live on the road system, the 83% of our communities that are not connected by the road, if you're not really connected by the road, that means we don't really have a lot of roads in a lot of these places. So why do you need a driver's license? You don't. You might live in a boardwalk community where you really don't have any roads. So, and you don't have the ability, again, to provide for a Department of Motor Vehicles in these communities. So there is an exception, and I want to acknowledge that that recognizes that Voters would be able to provide the last 4 digits of their social security number and an affidavit attesting that they're unable to obtain a copy of a valid photo ID. But it says, after making reasonable efforts to obtain a copy. So I want to know, what does that mean? What do reasonable efforts really mean? Because I worry that it might open the voter up to potential liability and result in different standards around the state. So it matters when we say, well, you can make reasonable efforts, but what does that really mean? What do I tell that person who comes from...
All right, everyone, that is Senator Murkowski on the floor there talking about the Save America Act. But right now, we want to go out to the White House. President Trump hosting the Japanese Prime Minister for dinner. Let's bring you right now inside the White House.
Thank you very much, everybody. Please, we have a very special person with us tonight, an amazing person. Tonight, I'm delighted to welcome a great friend and partner for her very first visit to the White House. We've become very close, so close that I endorsed her for her election. And she did well. She got the highest number ever gotten by somebody running for the highest position in Japan, beating out a lot of our friends, and it's a tremendous tribute. And that's our really amazing friend, the Japanese Prime Minister, who's going to speak in just a few minutes, but we're very honored to have you with us tonight. Thank you.
また私は最近この選挙において応援のメッセージを送ったんですけども、そこで高市総理は圧巻の勝利を示したということで、それも称えさせていただきたいと思います。
And I want to congratulate the Prime Minister on that unbelievable, all over the world they were talking about it, that victory in last month's election, winning by numbers that, as I said, nobody's ever seen in Japan before.
でまた世界中でもこれは大きな話題となり、高市総理ほどその票を獲得した人は今までいなかったと話題になりました。
And this was not only an amazing political achievement, it was a resounding declaration of strength and confidence, national spirit and resolve straight from the Japanese people who love you.
でまたこの勝利なんですけども、歴史上最大過半数を獲得したということで、これは圧巻の政治的な成果のみならず、力強さ、自信、国の精神と決心というものを国民から勝ち取ったという、これを宣言する結果となりました。
And the Prime Minister's visit comes as we're just days away from the most beautiful season here in Washington, which, by the way, is a crime-free city, just about. And we're very proud of that. We have done a great job, and it's a very safe place that people are coming to in record numbers. And the blooming of the Japanese cherry blossom trees is something very special. For more than a century, this magnificent explosion of pink and white has graced America's capital. I mean, it's been something that really represents Washington so well as a living symbol of the cherished friendships between two of our world's most extraordinary nations.
また総理はちょうど最も美しい時期にここ DC を訪問されています。これは日本の桜の木が満開間近になる時期であります。そしてここで加えさせていただきたいのが、今ここでの DC での犯罪率ゼロということで、非常に安全な場所になっていて、観光客もかなり記録的な数になっています。そして100年以上なんですけども、この桜の木というその爆発的な彩りですね、これを私たちは鑑賞することができました。これは日米の友情の生きている証、象徴であると思います。
And this year we're honored to receive an additional 250 cherry trees, and they're very big, beautiful trees from the great people of Japan in recognition of America's 250th anniversary. and they will remind every future generation of our timeless bond, and they'll be planted near and around the Washington Monument, and it's going to be something very special. They've already started the planting, but it's 250 beautiful specimen trees, and we'll get you over here. We'll check them out after they're planted. We'll get you back.
でまた今年はアメリカ建国250周年記念ということで、日本からさらに250本の桜の木を寄付していただいています。これは未来の世代にも永遠の私たちの絆を思い起こさせるものになることでしょう。これからワシントンモニュメント、またこの近隣で植樹をする予定ですけども、それが実際に植樹された後に確認をしてまいります。
Americans and Japanese come from opposite sides of the globe. But since the earliest days of commerce between our two countries, we've always recognized that despite obvious differences, we share a great deal in common.
また、日米なんですけども、地球上、全く反対の場所にありますが、昔ながら、その通商というものを行ってまいりました。違いはあれど共通するものも多くあるということが言えます。
Both of our civilizations have been defined and propelled by proud cultures deeply committed to excellence, hard work, and pushing the frontiers of what is possible. That's why in every field, human endeavors from so many different sides of the planet, from medicine to music, from art to engineering, you find that Americans and Japanese are leading the way, always leading the way.
また日米の文明なんですけども、共通するというものは私たちが各々の文化に対して誇りを持っているということ、常に最高を目指すという精神、勤勉であり、また可能性のあるものに対して追求をやめないというところが共通してあります。だからこそ日本とアメリカは医療、音楽、芸術、エンジニアリング、さまざまな分野において世界を牽引しているのです。
These shared traits and values have transcended every trial, history, and you look no matter where you go, you see this, and ultimately made our nations into strong allies and very close friends. Our partnership has made both the United States and Japan stronger, freer, and more successful than virtually any other nation on the planet. And under the leadership of the Prime Minister and myself, I know we will soon make that partnership even stronger and better than ever before. We have that relationship, and actually it started quite a while ago.
また私たちが共通する特性というものは、私たちが経験してきた試練をも乗り越えられるほどのものでした。だからこそ私たちの同盟はさらに強く、また緊密な関係を今構築できているわけです。日米のパートナーシップのもと、私たちはより強く自由で成功する国となることができました。高市総理と私のリーダーシップでこれからさらにこの関係を強くできるということを確信しています。
On my visit to Tokyo last year, we reached a historic trade deal that will increase our cooperation on everything from energy to semiconductors and shipbuilding and pharmaceuticals. It was a big one of the biggest deals ever made. The United States is also encouraged to see the steps the Prime Minister is taking to expand her country's commitment to its own security and defense, and buying a lot of our defense equipment, I'm happy to tell you.
また、昨年私が東京を訪問した際に大きな取引を日本と交わしました。ここでエネルギー、半導体、造船、医療に関して協力を拡大するという、最も大きな取引でありました。またそれに加えて今日本が取り組んでいる、高市総理が取り組んでいる自国の防衛安全保障、この進化、強化に取り組んでいることを心強く思っており、そういった面では防衛装備品というものを多く購入していただいていることにも、嬉しく思っております。
So just to close up with the commitment of the leaders and the biggest leaders in the country, some of the most successful people in the country politically and business-wise, and all of the partners in the room, the United States and Japan can be an unstoppable force for freedom, security, and progress for our countries and for the entire world to look up to. So let us stand together with the strength and dignity, purpose. Let us keep our people safe, our nations prospering, and our alliance flourishing for many, many generations to come. And with that, I'd just like to thank the Prime Minister. This is a spectacular woman, and it's an honor to have you with us at the White House. Thank you.
の世界を代表する、力を持っている政治家、ビジネスリーダーの方が多くいます。彼らの、コミットメントのもと、日米で自由、安保、国の成長というものを日米のみならず世界にももたらすことができ、私たちは止められない勢力になるということを私は確信しております。ですので、互いに力、尊厳、そして、その意思というものを持って共に立ち並びましょう。そして安全、国の繁栄、同盟の繁栄増進に向けて取り組んでいきたいと思います。では次に高市総理の方からもお言葉を頂戴したいと思います。
トランプ大統領、ご列席の、皆様、はじめにこのビューティフルディナーを開催していただいたことに心から感謝をいたします。
The Honorable President Donald J. Trump, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to take this opportunity to express my deepest gratitude for hosting such a beautiful dinner for me and my delegation.
ドナルドの日本への温かい思いや友情に改めてありがとうございます。
Donald, thank you very much for your warm feelings toward Japan and your friendship.
私からは今宵2つのアニバーサリーにお祝いの言葉をお伝えしたいと思います。
So tonight, I would like to start off by extending my sincere congratulations on two important anniversaries.
一つ目は、明日に控えるドナルドのご子息のバロンさんのお誕生日です。立派でイケメンに成長されていると伺っております。
The first one is a birthday celebration. Donald, tomorrow is the birthday of your son, Mr. Baron Trump. And I know he has grown up so much into a very tall, good-looking gentleman.
間違いなくご両親に似たんだと思います。
As I see you, Donald, it is very clear where he got it. Of course, from his parents, there's no doubt about it.
ぜひ私からのハッピーバースデーを、お伝えいただけたら嬉しいです。
So, Donald, if I may ask you, please convey my sincere happy birthday wishes to him.
Thank you.
そして2つ目、はもうさっきドナルドが喋っちゃったんですが、アメリカ建国、250周年を、今年自由と民主主義の理念を世界に示してきたアメリカがその歴史的節目を迎えると、いうことに日本政府、および日本国民を代表して、心からお喜び申し上げます。
The second one is the 250th anniversary of the United States, as you mentioned. The United States has long been an icon of freedom and democracy in the world, and this year, the United States is marking a historic milestone. And on behalf of the government and the people of Japan, I would like to extend my deepest congratulations to you and the American people.
そして、8月には250周年を祝う、インディカーレースが、このドナルドの、発案で、ここワシントン DC で開催されると伺っています。
And I understand that in August this year, at Donald's suggestion, IndyCar race Freedom 250 Grand Prix will be held here in Washington, D.C.
美しいナショナルモールを絞れと、日本のホンダのエンジンが爆走します。
This race will bring roaring Chevrolet and Honda engines to the National Mall.
そして、インディカーの冠スポンサーは日本企業の NTT でありまして、まさに日米友好のシンボルです。
In addition, Japan's NTT Group has been a title sponsor of the IndyCar series. As you see, IndyCar race is a perfect example of the friendship between Japan and the United States.
偉大なレースの大成功をお祈りします。
So I do hope that you have a huge success at this racing event.
さて、ワシントン DC では日本の桜が長年春の訪れを知らせるとともに日米友好の歴史を体現してきました。
Speaking of our friendship, here in Washington, D.C., Japanese sakura, or cherry trees, have long been letting us know the arrival of spring, and also it has been a symbol of the history of Japan-U.S. friendship.
これもドナルドがさっき喋っちゃったんですが、今年日本からワシントン DC に250本の桜をプレゼントして250年を祝います。
And this is also something that Donald already mentioned, but I would like to reiterate. This year, Japan extends a gift of additional 250 cherry trees to Washington, D.C. to celebrate America 250.
本当は桜の花束を抱えて、ドナルド、Nice to see you again ってやりたかったんですけれども、米国は検疫が厳しくていきなり花を持ち込めないってことに気がつきました。
Actually, my original plan was to bring so many cherry flowers and directly hand it to you, Donald. But unfortunately, because of the very strict quarantine measures, that I couldn't make this happen.
強い日本、強いアメリカ、豊かな日本、豊かなアメリカ、私たちはこれらを実現するための最強のバディだと確信しています。
A stronger Japan and a stronger America. A more prosperous Japan and a more prosperous America. I am very confident that Donald and I are the best buddies to realize this shared goal.
でドナルドと親交が深かった安倍晋三元総理がかつてこのワシントン DC の地で高らかに歌われた言葉を誇りと自信を持ってこの場で皆さんに再びお伝えいたします。
Late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who was Donald's dear friend and also my dear friend too, eloquently said one phrase here in Washington, D.C. upon his visit. And as I stand here today, I would like to repeat what he said with greater pride and confidence.
Japan is back. So, 日本は再び世界のイノベーションをリードします。そして新しい日本は世界の平和により一層大きな役割を果たしていきます。
Japan once again will lead the innovation in the world, and the new Japan stands ready to play an even greater role for world's peace.
日本はこの道のりをドナルドとそしてアメリカ国民の皆様と共に歩んでまいります。
Japan will continue to walk on such path together with Donald and together with the American people.
希望と強さを兼ね備えた日米同盟の新たな歴史の1ページを一緒に作っていこうではありませんか。Thank you.
Let us together create a new chapter in the history of Japan-US alliance, a chapter filled with hope and strength. Thank you very much.
The self-described best of buddies sitting next to each other at the White House for the dinner, wrapping up as the media now being let out of the room. We will keep an eye if there is any more remarks a little bit later. We'll bring that to you here on Live Now from Fox. All right, everyone, we'll take another 2-minute break. Stay right here with us. More to come in just moments. We are back here for you on Live Now from Fox. I'm your host, Mike Bache. Always great to be with you live. Look here at the White House. We just heard President Trump remarks. We'll play out some more of the highlights throughout the day as he met with the Japanese Prime Minister today. And we will play out a little bit later again from the Oval Office the full remarks from the president a little bit ago. All right, everyone, let's now take you out to the Senate floor. Still live right now, we see Senator Mike Lee continuing to talk on the Save America Act.
By the senator from Ohio, I think this is an exceptionally good idea. It's not every bill where it makes sense to separate out a provision, try to pass that provision on its own, separate from the rest of the text of the bill. But this is one of those instances where it makes sense. Now, don't get me wrong. Neither I nor the senator from Ohio are suggesting that we still don't need the rest of the Save America Act. That's not our point. The point is that these are separately divisible, such that they could be enacted separately. And insofar as there is a greater degree of consensus with regard to the voter ID component of the Save America Act than there are with regard to the citizenship components. It makes sense for us to get this done now. Let's pass it. Let's pass it right now. Let's pass it by unanimous consent. Let's make this law, and then we can proceed back to deal with the rest of the issues within the Save America Act. This is what progress looks like. This is what consensus building looks like. And I thank my friend and colleague from Ohio for raising this. Look, no matter how you feel about the rest of the provisions of the bill, it's not too much to ask somebody to just show who they are when they show up on voting day. That provision is very simple. Let's get this passed. Let's get it done right now.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of S 4155, which is at the desk. Further, that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Madam President.
Senator from Oregon.
Reserving the right to object, I appreciate the information my colleague from Ohio and my colleague from Utah brought forward. But just minutes ago, another colleague from Alaska was on this floor laying out the enormous difficulties that this very proposal would create, disenfranchising a tremendous number of people across her state. Now, this is part of a larger bill that has the goal of stopping citizens from voting. It is targeted directly to stop making it very difficult for women to vote. It would proceed to make it very difficult for students to vote. It would make it very difficult for tribal members to vote. My colleague from Ohio mentioned the phrase, the goal is to make it easy to vote and hard to cheat. But in fact, it's all about making it hard to vote. This broader bill is all about creating a national voter registration database that the administration has the ability to purge. They can then ding people, give them a little ping, if you will, and say, we stripped your name out, try to go re-register, but in fact, they can do that right before the election. And it's already been laid out. You can't even register to vote under this broader law with your birth certificate. No, you have to have birth certificate and something else. They do say you could register to vote with just your passport, but that brings in a very expensive enterprise, and it takes 6 months to do that. But let's focus on this particular piece. This measure before us proceeds to destroy the secret ballot. In 2024, 48 million citizens voted by mail. That includes the state of Utah, that my good friend was just speaking from, representing. It includes the state of Oregon. Now, those 48 million folks, they're told, you have to tell the world how you're voting, because you have to put your copy of your birth certificate or your driver's license in with your ballot. So when they open your secret ballot, your name's inside there with the same document of how you voted. Well, that's pretty troubling, this effort to destroy the secrecy of the ballot for 48 million Americans. Now, my colleague from Ohio has a lot of studies and experience that I will acknowledge. And I'm not familiar with all the studies that he's conducted. But I am familiar with the study from the good state of Utah, an examination of 2 million voters. That examination, done by his state government, found that there was one person registered who should not have been registered out of those 2 million people, but that person had never voted. So the number or amount of fraud was 0 out of 2 million. I'm not sure if Ohio could even match that incredible level of integrity that Utah achieved, to be able to have an audit that shows 0 people who weren't qualified to vote voted. Oregon had a study that covered 20 years of voting. 20 years, that's a long period of time. They found cases that were, if you will, potentially a problem in less than 1 out of a million. I'm not sure Ohio could match that either, because the system of voting by mail has a lot more integrity than the system of voting at the polls. You see, voting at the polls introduces so much opportunity for shenanigans. The people involved who don't want a particular community to vote, well, they move the precinct locations between elections, so people go to the wrong place. They put the precinct election places where there's no place to park, a deliberate effort to disenfranchise individuals. They proceed to put in voting workers who don't work or machines that don't work in order to create long lines. And others have put out false information about the location and false information about the date. This is a whole series of proven strategies to corrupt elections on election day. And that is why President Trump wants to shut down vote by mail, because it's easy to manipulate and corrupt the election on election day using these systems that have been well studied and well practiced in many jurisdictions. Well, I value integrity, and Utah and Oregon have shown that type of integrity. In fact, Utah's lieutenant governor, I might mention, he shares the party that is across the aisle from me. He noted that this bill would violate the state election law, which guarantees a secret ballot. Assault on the secret ballot, an effort to be able to manipulate election day in a corrupt manner, an effort to rig the November election. That is what we're talking about right here. And this, Madam President, is absolutely wrong, because we should be down here defending the high integrity system of vote by mail, not trying to corrupt its secrecy or trying to stop it altogether. And thus, Madam President, I ask that the senator modify his request and take my amendment at the desk to be considered and agreed to, the bill as amended to be considered and read a third time and passed, and the motions to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table.
Is there an objection to the modification?
Madam President,
Senator from Ohio.
reserving the right to object. I want to address some of the points that were made by the senator from Oregon. There were a lot of point made about citizenship. The amendment that I'm proposing has nothing to do with citizenship. It has to do with photo ID. 5 simple ways that have been proven and successful in many states to determine if the person showing up to vote is indeed the person who is registered to vote. It's that simple. 5 forms of identification that everyone has access to. It's not about, this particular amendment is not about citizenship. It's about photo ID. Secondly, I want to address the issue about protecting the secrecy of the ballot. Well, let me also say there's no birth certificate required in this particular amendment that I have. And then I want to talk about the secrecy of the ballot. Let me explain the administration of how elections officials make sure that their ballot, that the ballot that is being mailed in is indeed a legitimate vote. There are 2 envelopes. The first envelope is the security envelope. That envelope determines if the individual is eligible, in which they could put inside that envelope, put their copy of their photo ID or their social security number on the form that you would have them fill out. The second envelope contains the actual ballot. And what happens once that ballot is received, 2 elections officials in the state of Ohio, 1 Republican and 1 Democrat, look at it, they validate the integrity of the envelope that was received with the ballot that's contained, and then remove that, separate all the identification over here, and put the secured ballot that has been validated as legal into another box, which is then loaded in the machines and later counted on election night. The secrecy of the vote is in no way jeopardized by that process. How do I know? We've been using it for years. It's never been a problem. And we have a Democrat and Republican right there with their eyes on it, making sure that that happens. Now to the substance of the gentleman's amendment. There are many reasons that I could object to this, but I will take one, because this is the Freedom to Vote by Mail Act. It's a very large amendment in which it authorizes unsolicited mail-in ballots. Let me repeat, unsolicited mail-in ballots, meaning I didn't ask for it. You just sent me a ballot. Why is this wrong? I will give you a couple of examples. In Wood County, where Bowling Green State University is in Ohio, at one point in time, we had more registered voters than there were people in the county. You say, how could that happen? Because Bowling Green State University is there, and every 4 years when you're a swing state, people really try to get every single student to register to vote on that campus. And so over years, according to the National Voting Rights Act, you cannot remove somebody for being an inactive voter, meaning just because I didn't show up and vote, I'm on the voter rolls, you can't remove me. Well, I want to just give you a reason why they might still be on the rolls, because when they graduate from college, they don't think to call the Wood County Board of Elections and remove themselves from the rolls. They just stay on there. And according to federal law, you just can't remove them for being inactive for at least 6 years, and you have to go through a series of verifications, which is what I did in Ohio and was part and parcel to the Husted versus Philip A. Randolph Institute process that was approved. So in states that don't do that, which there are many that don't, what you have are people that may attend the University of Oregon, they may be from Columbus, Ohio, they may graduate from college and live in an apartment on campus, and when they move back to Ohio, you wouldn't know the difference. They're still on the rolls, and you're sending them a ballot. And they're not even legally allowed to vote in that state because you can't remove them from the rolls without going through a 6-year process. That's the federal law. That's why we have so many people, so many ballots in states that do unsolicited absentee balloting, with ballots floating around out there, and they are not supposed to be sent. They aren't, the person that they're being sent to is not legally allowed to vote, because they may very well be registered in another state and you wouldn't even know it. So, on that basis, Madam President, I object.
Objection to the modification is heard.
Madam
Is there an
President?
objection to the original request?
Yes, reserving the right to object. I noticed my colleague didn't answer the fact that student IDs are not one of those 5, that tribal IDs are not one of those 5s, and that nobody in the country can say any system is better than Utah's, which has 0 cases out of 2 million. And I would guess a study of Ohio would find that it's probably not as good as Oregon and probably not as good as Utah. And the reason why is because our states take so seriously integrity in the voting process. That's why these surveys show that the issue of fraud is either 0 or vanishingly small. So vanishingly rare, you have a better chance of being struck by lightning. This bill that they're presenting, this broader bill, it's not to address fraud. It's to make it very hard for targeted groups in America to vote and to make it impossible in the broader bill to vote by mail because they want you to have to vote in a system that can be manipulated. And I did notice he didn't address a single one of the 6 ways I noted that voting at the polls are often manipulated. For that reason, and because I believe in the integrity of our voting process and will not allow it to be degraded in this horrific fashion, I object.
Objection is heard. Senator from Colorado.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd ask that the poster in front of me be. Oh.
Ask if you can be recognized after.
May I be recognized after Senator Merkley, Madam President?
Is there objection? Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President.
Senator from Oregon.
Back in 2022, Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in prison for sex trafficking minors as Jeffrey Epstein's co-conspirator in their horrific crimes against women and girls. She was a key person in the grooming, the abuse, and the rape of a vast number of young girls. Bureau of Prison policy requires that sex offenders are housed at least low security prisons. And to explain, there are high security, medium security, low security, and then way down at the bottom, you know, think hotels, there's this minimum security. But prison policy requires that minimum security is unacceptable for people who have been sex offenders. People like Ghislaine Maxwell. But then, in July of 2025, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche spent 2 days meeting with her in conversations that are completely opaque to everyone else in America. And suddenly, after these 2 days of conversation, in which who knows what was promised, she was transferred to a minimum facility in Bryan, Texas, otherwise known as Club Med. Now, in this minimum facility, there's an athletic field, there's extracurricular activities, there's vocational training, and access to service dogs. I guess that's pretty important to me because I love dogs. And I would love, if ever I was incarcerated, to have access to a dog. Hopefully I'll never be incarcerated. On top of all of this was a set of special treatments that she received after Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche had her transferred to Club Fed. What kinds of special treatment did she get? Well, her meals were customized and prepared by federal prison camp staff, and then personally delivered to her cell by federal employees. When she wanted to arrange a private meeting with visitors, the warden personally arranged it for her. The warden, the head of the prison, personally was her personal assistant. And then she provided a special cordoned off area for the visitors to arrive and an assortment of snacks and refreshments for her guests. Does that sound like prison to you? Special assistant, the head of the prison, arranges snacks and refreshments. It sounds more like a congressional reception. Her guests were permitted to bring computers, an unprecedented action approved by the warden specifically for Ms. Maxwell. When Ms. Maxwell wanted to review and edit documents quickly, she was allowed to use the warden, Tricia Hall, as her personal secretary and administrative assistant. Ms. Maxwell's correspondents would email documents directly to the warden, who would then provide them and deliver them to Ms. Maxwell, who could then review them and edit them and provide them back to the warden, who would then scan them and provide them back to the original sender. For other inmates, even at this minimum security prison, simple mail can take weeks to arrive and is frequently lost. An inmate who trains puppies to become service dogs was instructed to provide one of these puppies to Ms. Maxwell so she could play with the puppy, even though neither inmates nor staff are ordinarily allowed to play with the dogs in training. And when she wanted to go to the prison exercise area, she was personally escorted there after hours, that is, after normal hours, by prison guards so she could work out all by herself and enjoy recreation time in the staff-only areas. Folks, what happened in those 2 days when Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche went down and held these private conversations, and by the way, the type of conversations that are never held in that fashion by a Deputy Attorney General? Only him, with her. And now, the head of a prison is her personal assistant, and she gets to use the staff area for her personal recreation, and she gets her puppy time, and she gets her meals prepared and hand-delivered. Folks, club fed for a woman who facilitated the grooming, the abuse, and the rape of untold numbers of young women. This, my friends, is absolutely wrong. It's a slap in the face to every victim. The victims may not even be able to live in the way that she's living in this minimum security prison with the warden as her personal assistant. And so I think we can all agree on that. And so I ask for the Sex Offender Security Classification Integrity Act that the Senate proceed to immediate consideration of the bill. It is at the desk, and it would ensure that a sex offender who under prison policy cannot be put in a minimum security facility could not be put into that minimum security facility the way she has.
Jeff Merkley, the Democrat from Oregon, speaking on Capitol Hill tonight. Another late night as lawmakers debate the Save America Act. We here at Live Now prioritize live coverage. Right now, we do have a live image coming in from Florida's Space Coast. This is NASA's VAB, the Vehicle Assembly Building, where the Artemis rocket will be wheeled out we do plan to carry a live stream on YouTube. If you want to watch the very slow rollout of this rocket ship, they'll be getting that done starting in the coming hours here. We'll start to see the launcher come out of the building, eventually be settled at its launching pad, where sometime in April we expect we'll see the Artemis rocket launch. So keep an eye on Central Florida. We'll also keep an eye on the White House as we head to our first break of the hour. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. I'm Austin Westfall. Reuters says that the Trump administration is considering deploying thousands of U.S. troops to reinforce its operations in the Middle East. The outlet saying the deployments could help provide Trump with additional options as he weighs expanding U.S. operations with the Iran war now well into its third week. Reuters' Phil Stewart had the reporting. He's here with us. And Phil, final decisions haven't been made yet, so how far along does this planning appear to be at this point?
Is pretty mature, and the discussions are the big question. You know, how close is the president to deciding not just about whether to, deploy these forces? We get the sense that the reinforcements are sort of inevitable as this operation carries on. But really, what is he going to do when it comes to these goals that haven't really been incorporated into military planning yet, or into military actions yet, like securing the Strait of Hormuz, potentially occupying a key island that is crucial for Iran's oil industry, and whether or not it's going to go after, whether the U.S. is going to try and secure Iran's stocks of highly enriched uranium.
Ultimately, we talk about a lot of the reports that are happening behind the scenes, and then we watch every day President Trump live at White House press events. So there's kind of this if you will, a gap between the public messaging versus what we're hearing behind the scenes. How would you describe that gap as far as boots on the ground goes?
Well, today it was really interesting. The president said two things. He said first that he wasn't planning on sending troops anywhere, and then he said after that if he was planning on doing it, he wouldn't tell a reporter. And so I think he's the White House said, and when we asked them about the story, that they're keeping the president keeps his options open, and I don't think you heard very much different today from the president. He just said at this moment, we're not sending anyone we're not sending anybody anywhere because he hasn't decided on that. And then secondly, if he did make a decision to have a major change in policy or plans, he wouldn't announce it like that. He would probably use the element of surprise or try to incorporate it into planning in a way that wouldn't be revealed, kind of off the cuff at a press event.
Do we have any level of clarity about where U.S. troops are being considered for deployment? Would this be off the shores of Iran near the Strait of Hormuz? Would this be up further north toward Karg Island? Do we have any indicators?
So, the discussions are on those 2 points, and what we revealed in our reporting was that there is actually discussions and planning around the idea of deploying U.S. ground forces or U.S. forces. There might be Marines along the coasts of on the shores of the Strait of Hormuz to help ensure that that ships aren't attacked by kind of short-range rockets, and then also the question about Karg Island is a live one because we saw this week a real escalation in attacks and counterattacks on Iran and Gulf energy infrastructure. So there's a real risk about having this conflict widen to a much bigger set of targets, and it's unclear whether Karg Island would really accelerate that or whether it might put a real pause on it by shaking the Iranian government into some sort of compromise. So that's one school of thought. Other folks think that's highly unlikely.
Is it likely that this would be that new Marine Expeditionary Unit that we heard about some days ago?
So there is a new Marine Expeditionary Unit that has been previously announced that's going over there. We don't know whether or not there might be, additional forces beyond that. So we're not talking about, the previously announced ARGMU that's heading to the region. These reinforcements would be in addition to that.
So if we could just tie this in a bow, I suppose. How much political risk would come with the deployment of ground troops? Why is President Trump considering doing this despite some of the political uphill battling that would for sure happen if something was announced?
Well, I think, that there's something that we need to kind of make clear to your viewers, which is that when people think about ground troops, they're often imagining kind of the invasion of Iraq or what happened in Afghanistan, where it was divided up into, regional command south and north and east and west. And I think what's happening here is there's discussions about a much more limited ground presence for limited purposes. So, whether it would be putting pressure on the Iranian government on Karg Island, or making sure that ships could pass the Strait of Hormuz, or potentially, and this is a big one, would be a really risky operation. Would be sending special forces to try and secure highly enriched uranium. But any of those missions are much more limited than trying to run Iran with a military occupation. So I think when people think ground forces, they're thinking that big thing, and that political risk would be enormous. The political risk of a small operation is also pretty serious. Depending on which option you choose, because given the risks to those men and women who might be involved in that broader operation.
Bill Stewart with us tonight. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
Let's hit a quick break. We'll be right back. You're watching Live Now. I'm Austin Westfall. I'm excited for the Artemis launch. It's going to be happening sometime in April, but it takes them some time to wheel the rocket out to the launch pad. This is the vehicle assembly building where they will be rolling this rocket out from. This is NASA's camera, by the way. We're streaming this live as they move this thing from the vehicle assembly building, the VAB. They're going to move it to the launch pad. It's a slow process, so we're going to have a stream rolling on YouTube throughout the process. You can scan the QR code on your screen. It'll take you to our stream on YouTube. If you feel like watching it throughout the night or if you feel like checking in on it every once in a while, that's how you can do it. Right there. I'll leave that up on the screen for a moment. The Artemis 2 launch, by the way, for those curious, it's not going to bring humans to the moon quite yet. That'll be Artemis 3. Artemis 2 is simply going to bring humans around the moon. They're going to orbit the moon on Artemis 2. It's going to be the same type of rocket, but they still got to do some test launches and some test operations before they do the full thing. And then, far in the future, they're going to try and use this same type of booster to eventually bring humans to Mars. But again, far down the road. Okay, QR code on your screen is how you can watch that stream tonight. A live look at the White House, the time in the nation's capital, just past 8:15. A couple live looks in D.C. We'll take you out to the Senate floor in a moment here. Just want to show you a couple of live looks we have around the country, moving up to the Big Apple, a live look at New York City. See some of that vehicle and foot traffic in the Big Apple. And back to Florida. Cape Canaveral is where the Space Coast is. So that's why we have this live bump shot of Cape Canaveral tonight. We, of course, track these live vantage points a lot of times because you never know what you're going to see on the Space Coast. Sometimes SpaceX will be busy doing rocket launches, but for now, what I'm going to do is simply, yeah, okay, they're changing the, the iris on the shot now. They're making it a little bit brighter. By the way, this Live Now look is sponsored by Autoparts.com. You can scan that QR code in the bottom corner of your screen if you want to visit their website. We'll be checking in on Cape Canaveral as the evening progresses. And again, that other QR code will help you find our live stream on our YouTube channel as well. One more QR code for you. While we're talking all about QR codes, we're going to be talking with Alon and Hal a little bit later on in the evening. That QR code is how you can send in questions. We're going to show some of your questions to our analysts and experts about the Middle East. What questions do you have about the war in Iran? Feel free to scan that QR code. Go to the Ask Now tab once you get on our landing page. Submit your question. You very well may see it presented to one of our analysts and experts as the night goes on. Okay, done with the QR codes, I promise. Let's go back out to Capitol Hill, where we are seeing Michael Bennet, the Colorado Democrat, speaking on the Save America Act. Let's pull the audio up. This is live.
Thank you.
Senator from Colorado, I cannot hear anything.
If you guys
may
are done,
proceed.
Madam President, I just would like to
The Senate
get
is in
through.
order.
Thank you, Madam
proceed.
President. If we pass this bill, Madam President, we will now have two different election regimes in this country. One for federal elections and one for local elections. That is insane in and of itself, and begs the question, why does Donald Trump want to pass this bill? He wants to run roughshod over our election system because he claims there is an epidemic of voter fraud caused by undocumented people voting. That's at the heart of his claim. And that has been the heart of his claim throughout two presidential elections and this presidency. The problem is that he is blowing up our elections, and there is no evidence to support his claim of fraud. The fact is that even his own Department of Homeland Security, used by many states to verify voter citizenship, returned 0.04% of voter participants as non-citizens. A bipartisan policy center analysis of the Heritage Foundation's debate of non-citizen voting found only 77 cases in 25 years of nearly 2 billion votes cast. And individual states tell us the same. We heard it earlier tonight. Last year, Utah performed a citizen review of its entire voter registration list. There was no non-compliance. After an assessment of more than 2 million registered voters, Utah identified only one confirmed instance of non-citizen registration and no instances of non-citizen voting. We definitely have a crisis in our democracy, Madam President, and in our economy, and they are related. Over the decades, we have suffered through an economy that has reduced economic mobility and hollowed out America's middle class. At the same time, we built a tax system that disproportionately benefits those who own assets and perpetuates the inequalities that accumulated with generational wealth. A tax system that allows Donald Trump and Elon Musk to pass their stock portfolios on to their heirs without paying a dollar on the gains that they have accrued. That is a crisis. The lack of economic mobility is a crisis. And I'm sorry to say that that tax regime, that's been done in a bipartisan manner. Republicans, definitely more than Democrats, have pursued trickle-down economics, but Democrats and Republicans have both played a role creating an unfair system that reinforces our desperate lack of economic mobility and concretizes our deep and growing economic inequality. At the same time, this body has failed to make important investments in our infrastructure while saddling future generations with ever greater amounts of debt. Debt whose service costs will now predictably take up $1 trillion of our annual budget in interest, more than we spend on Medicare, Madam President, or defense, a higher share of the economy than at any point in American history. We are in a dangerous moment, Madam President, at home and abroad. There is no doubt about that. And at the same time, as Coloradans and Americans across the country are struggling to get by, as teachers are going to those food banks to feed their own children, when confidence in our institutions and in our politics is at record lows, and we have a campaign finance system that gives inordinate power to the wealthiest. Tonight's not the night to go through how wrongly decided Citizens United was, how wrongly decided, how ignorant that decision was of the way politics actually works in this country. But let me just point out to you, Madam President, that in 2008, before Citizens United was decided, the top 100 individual donors contributed a combined $80 million. $80 million in 2008. That's what the 100 donors contributed. In 2024, the top 10 donors, Madam President, contributed over $1.2 billion. Spending by outside groups has exploded from a total of $574 million in 2008 to almost $4.5 billion in that last election, an increase of 8 times. 8 times, Madam President. No one could possibly believe that the amount of money, that amount of money is helping our democracy. Let me tell you something. Does the SAVE Act do anything about that corrosiveness in our politics? Of course not. Of course not. Of course not. And let me tell you something. It was a fatal flaw in the Supreme Court's decision while I'm here, Madam President. Maybe the Pages, when their senators, will be able to fix this problem, because we sure aren't going to fix it. At the end of that, at the end of their decision, they said, by the way, if the Congress ever passes a constitutional regulation of, in their words, constitutional regulation of the outside spending in our political system, we will, of course, have to give that the proper analysis, the proper, excuse me, the required constitutional analysis. Of course, nobody will ever pass that around here, because the billionaires that are writing checks to these elections just have to rattle the pennies in their pockets and the change in their pockets and threaten to run a primary against anybody in this place, and the bill won't be brought. And then there's a profound corruption of inaction that sets in as a result to our legislative branch, both here and in the House of Representatives. Does the SAVE Act, does the Save America Act address any of this? Of course not. Instead, Donald Trump and the Republicans have brought to the floor a bill to make it harder for ordinary American citizens to register and to vote. Fundamentally, the Save America Act is an astonishing federal overreach in search of a scandal that doesn't exist and would have the effect of undermining fraud-free elections like we have in Colorado. And Colorado was the first state in America to complete a risk-limiting audit, the gold standard for verifying the integrity of election results. It entails counting and comparing a representative sample of ballots to the reported result. To prevent hacking, none of our voting machines are connected to the internet. We require county clerks to use two-factor authentication to access voter databases. Once a vote is cast, Madam President, a bipartisan team of election judges in each county checks every signature against the copy in the database for any discrepancies. All election officials and judges with access to the tabulation process must first pass a Colorado Bureau of Investigation background check. And Colorado has spent years implementing top-tier cybersecurity measures and audits to prevent hackers from interfering in our electoral process. We should be modeling our federal system off the gold standard framework we have in Colorado, a national leader in terms of voter access, election security, and might I say, voter turnout. Instead, the Save America Act would eliminate, outlaw many of the practices that Colorado has adopted to keep our elections safe and increase voter confidence. How dare you? It would end Colorado's mail-in and online voter registration system. It would force Colorado to increase the security risks of our voter data and routinely purge voter rolls. It would push experienced county clerks and election workers out of the field. It would remove the possibility of using a number of state IDs when going to vote. It would create 2 tiers of voting for federal and state elections, and possibly upend our mail-in ballot system itself by requiring that every Coloradan proactively request a ballot and resubmit proof of ID alongside their ballot request in every election. Colorado already has ID requirements when casting a ballot. We already have among the cleanest voter rolls in this country. We don't need Donald Trump to corrupt our process. Even the Heritage Foundation ranked us as second in the nation in 2020 for clean lists. The Heritage Foundation. We have one of the most secure election systems of any state in our country. And because Coloradans have trust in our elections. We have some of the highest voter turnout in the country. But the Save America Act, the so-called Save America Act, does not bring our system anywhere close to what we enjoy in Colorado. Instead, it turns it to a dark but familiar pattern in American history. And I'm sorry to say, Madam President, but this bill before us is just another in a long line of legislative efforts to limit the franchise in this country, to add new restrictions and additional obstacles. Nobody wants voter fraud. I do not want voter fraud. I come from a state where there is no voter fraud. We set the gold standard in part because of the work my colleague John Hickenlooper did when he was governor of Colorado. This is a pretext. This is a pretext to invade our elections. I know my colleague from Texas wants to speak, so I'm trying to skip ahead here.
Okay. Michael Bennett speaking on the Senate floor. A live look at the White House. The time in the nation's capital just past 8:30. It's time for us to step away for a quick commercial break. Before we do, let's pull this up one more time for anybody who has any questions about the conflict in the Middle East. This is the QR code where you can scan to submit your questions to us. We'll be speaking with Hal Kemper and Alon Burstein a little bit later. See a little bit of PC animation stuff going on there, but if you want to scan that QR code, you can scan it and it'll take you to the Ask Now. It'll take you to a landing page where you're going to want to click on the Ask Now tab. You can submit your questions. You very well may see them posed to Hal or Alon a little bit later in the night. All right. Still keeping an eye on Kennedy Space Center. Curious what this is. This is basically the big boxy building. It's tough to see because it's so dark, but this is the big boxy building where they assemble all of the rockets. And it's a little tough to make it out, but they are slowly wheeling this Artemis 2 rocket out of the VAB. Gonna continue to keep an eye on that as the night continues. Let's hit that commercial break. We'll be right back. You're watching Live Now. I'm Austin Westfall, Capitol Hill. Still active tonight as Michael Bennett continues to speak on the Save America Act. Let's keep watching.
In Puerto Rico, his Justice Department has sued 30 states, including Colorado, demanding sensitive, unredacted voter data to create a national voter database. And President Trump has pursued a longstanding and inexplicable grievance against mail-in voting, which he falsely claims can be used to commit mass amounts of fraud. It is simply not true. It is simply not true. He sees in his own words the Save America Act as a method to, quote, guarantee the midterms this November. He sees in his own words the Save America Act as a method to, quote, guarantee the midterms this November. And that is why they put this on this floor now? I hope not. I really hope not. This is an election bill that distorts our shared understanding of what free and fair elections should look like. And Coloradans want no part of it. This legislation, by the way, Madam President, is wildly unpopular in America. We have received thousands of calls and letters in opposition to the Save America Act. We received over 7,000 last month alone. Madam President, I'd offer some constituent letters into the record if there's no objection. Thank you, Madam President. The founders understood the gravity of the debate before them about who could and who could not claim the franchise. The authors of Federalist Number 52 explained that the, quote, definition of the right of suffrage, the definition of the right of suffrage is very justly regarded as a fundamental article of Republican government. They wrestled with this question. They wrestled with this question. They debated it. And ultimately, they excluded the great number of subjects who were newly made Americans. But nevertheless were denied, as those at Seneca Falls wrote, quote, the first right of a citizen. This was the founding generation's great mistake. This and the enslavement of Americans. And we have spent centuries working to rectify it. Centuries working to rectify it. Should the Save America Act pass, we will fall further away from realizing this country's promise and retread the familiar errors of the past. We should reject that vision of our democracy. We should reject that return to a history that we have fought so far to free ourselves from. Coloradans and all Americans deserve better than this. And with that, Madam President, I yield the floor and look forward to hearing my colleague from Texas.
Madam President.
Senator from Texas.
Madam President, it's been 34 days since Democrats chose to shut down the funding of the Department of Homeland Security, jeopardizing America's safety and well-being. No less than 120,000 DHS employees have missed paychecks, including the hard-working TSA agents and screeners that work at our nation's airports, who've been working around the clock without pay to keep spring break travelers and others safe. For example, in my home state of Texas, Houston Hobby Airport's been recommending that travelers arrive at least 3 hours before their flights. And if it's an international flight, they recommend 4 hours in advance. Well, they're not alone. Staffing constraints have not only led to longer wait times around the country, but also significant delays, disruptions, and missed flights. The only reason I can fathom, other than being completely out of touch, that our Democratic colleagues would do this is because not all members of Congress are being forced to experience the same mess of their own making right now. As many Americans probably don't know, but most of us in Washington do know, airports around the country allow members of Congress to bypass the usual TSA security screening process at airports nationwide. In other words, they get to skip the line. This should end today. Instead of enduring the same travel tribulations and security requirements that everyone else has to meet, members of Congress are getting an unfair perk, while TSA officers have to work without pay. That's why I come to the floor today to pass my legislation called the End Special Treatment for Congress at Airports Act to stop the practice of expedited TSA screening processes for members of Congress at our nation's airports. This legislation would ensure that
John Cornyn talking about the ongoing partial government shutdown. DHS still wrestling with that funding deadline that hit some weeks back. Of course, many of the senators that we've been listening to all night have been discussing the Save America Act, but a number of lawmakers also taking the time on the Senate floor tonight to speak about other legislation that's important to them and their constituents. A live look at the White House, the time approaching 8:45 in the nation's capital. A lot to discuss at the White House and in the Middle East. Let's hit a quick commercial break. We'll be right back. President Trump has signaled that Iran's nuclear ambitions and continued missile development as primary justifications for the war in the Middle East. And today, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that Iran can no longer enrich uranium or make ballistic missiles. Let's bring in Andrea Stricker. She's a nuclear non-proliferation expert with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. You know, Andrea, I saw this report come in today, and I heard Benjamin Netanyahu speaking today. And it made me wonder, what needs to be true on the ground in Iran in order for Netanyahu to have the level of confidence to say that they can no longer enrich uranium in Iran?
Great to be with you, Austin. I think Netanyahu has a rosy view of this. He's done quite a bit of damage together with the United States during Operation Midnight Hammer last June to degrade Iran's pathway to nuclear weapons. But outstanding, of course, remains the question of Iran's highly enriched uranium stocks. There's enough for about 11 nuclear weapons, and they still remain entombed in the Esfahan tunnel complex and the Fordow enrichment site. The U.S. intelligence community just affirmed this today in testimony. And so while he may have degraded the enrichment sites, there still are remnants to deal with, and that is no easy task ahead of them.
So I was reading that it's believed that Iran has 970 pounds of enriched uranium, presumably the same stuff that you're talking about underneath that site. How can the U.S. and Israel ensure that that can't be used?
It's an important question because there really is a difficult obstacle ahead of them in terms of these two damaged or destroyed facilities. So the Esfahan tunnels were hit with Tomahawk missiles, rendering the entrances inaccessible. And then the Fordow enrichment site, of course, is around 60 to 80 meters below a mountain. And so if we're talking about ensuring this material doesn't remain in play anymore, it could require even special forces teams to go in and excavate it. I think we would see President Trump wait until the security conditions are a lot better so that his team doesn't come under threat if he decides to move on with an operation like that.
So just to be clear, would it be boots on the ground? Is that the common train of thought? That would be necessary in order to make sure that it's not used, or would they have to actually seize it to make sure it's not used?
Yeah, likely you would need a special forces team on the ground, nothing lengthy, although it could require some excavation activity at those sites. So you could even be talking about doing this once the regime in Tehran is no more. Hopefully you would have a more secure situation and a government that would allow the IAEA, potentially a UN team to come in and ensure the full dismantlement of these types of facilities and assets. Otherwise, I'm not sure that you could do much good by hitting these sites again with the bunker busting bombs.
How difficult would it be for 970 pounds of enriched uranium to be turned into a weapon?
It only takes a few days. In fact, Steve Witkoff, the president's special envoy to the Middle East, has made this point recently. It's just a few days to go from 60 to 90% or weapons grade. And so the Iranians would really just need a small enrichment plant with a few hundred advanced centrifuges. Hopefully Netanyahu is correct and they don't have the capacity to have enrichment right now. And that would definitely buy the US and Israel some time to deal with the HEU at a later point.
So does it feel like any enriched uranium that may still be left, there's nothing that the US or Israel can do from the air that could make sure that that isn't used for a weapon?
Certainly they could deny access to people, Iranian officials or teams that might try to go into these facilities. I would certainly expect that US and Israeli intelligence eyes from the air on that, if not on the ground, to eliminate anybody who might come close or try to gain access to the HEU.
Always appreciate the time, Andrea. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, let's head back out to Capitol Hill. It looks like we've still got activity on the Senate floor. Again, largely what we're seeing here is the debate over the Save America Act, but we're seeing some lawmakers are speaking about other pieces of legislation as well. But in general, this is why they're up this late at night. They're talking about President Trump's Save America Act. Let's keep listening in. This is happening right now.
With proud people, and they may welcome the riddance of the Ayatollahs, but will fiercely reject American and Israeli occupiers. Iran is also huge. It stretches as far as the distance from Houston, Texas to New York. It has as many people as California, Texas, and Florida combined. Madam President, Iraq and Afghanistan taught us something that we must not forget, and that is the limits of military power. In the early phases of both of those wars, as in Iran now, the extraordinary skills and capabilities of our military won impressive victories. But, Madam President, what followed those early victories in Iraq and Afghanistan is already upon us in Iran. And that's the asymmetric response, the one where the United States, with all its military might, is at a disadvantage. Iran's drone attacks have closed the Straits of Hormuz, something that the Secretary of Energy dismissed as something that couldn't happen. Nearly 1/3 of the global oil, fertilizer, and helium supplies that we need, that the world needs, flow through the Strait of Hormuz. You know, in 1973, we had a big oil disruption that involved only 7% of oil supplies, but it created a global economic shock that reverberated for 10 years. This one could even be worse. And Iran can keep the strait closed as long as they have access to just enough drones or enough small boats loaded with explosives that keep international shippers fearful of losing cargo and crew from risking passage. The cost to American families and businesses from the closing of the strait, from this asymmetric warfare, those costs are staggering. Across the country, gas prices at the pump are up at least $1. The average American family will pay an additional $2,000 a year in gas. And as a country, we are paying an additional $2 billion every day, $2 billion, as the war premium that we have to pay at the pump. And in Vermont and across the country, our farmers are paying up to 35 to 40% more for fertilizer. More than 1/3 of global fertilizer supplies come through the strait. And just ahead of spring planting, farms are facing additional tens of thousands of dollars to do business. And Vermont families are also paying a war premium to heat their homes. Heating prices for heating oil are surging from around just a little over $3 a gallon to over $4.70 a gallon. And an average family is going to be facing an $1,000 additional expense to maintain heat in their home. And Madam President, as you know, the Pentagon costs are absolutely staggering. The war is costing at least $2 billion a day. The Pentagon has told Congress that the first 6 days cost $11.3 billion, not including many other undisclosed things. The Pentagon, we're told, is going to be requesting a $200 billion supplemental. That, by the way, is triple the cost of all U.S. weapons sent to Ukraine. We're spending $15 million apiece for THAAD interceptors to shoot down Iranian missiles. We're spending $4 million apiece for Patriot interceptors that are shooting down Shahed drones that cost $25,000. More than 1,300 civilians have already been killed, including over 100 girls, by a U.S. strike that went wrong. And more than 1,000 have been killed in Lebanon, where Israel, under Netanyahu, is inflicting a relentless attack. That includes more than 100 children. Madam President, we've had losses, too, in the United States from brave service members who respond to the call of duty. And I want to acknowledge their service and their loss. Major Jeffrey O'Brien, Captain Cody Cork, Chief Warrant Officer Robert Marzan, Sergeant First Class Noah Tegens, Sergeant First Class Nicole Amor, Sergeant Declan Cody, Sergeant Benjamin Pennington, Major John Kilmer, Captain Ariana Savino, Captain Seth Koval, Captain Curtis Angst, Technical Sergeant Ashley Pruitt, Technical Sergeant Tyler Simmons. I also want to pay respects and acknowledge the exemplary service of the Vermont Air National Guard's 158th Fighter Wing. Their critical skills were requested by name and unit. Their unique mission means they're often the first ones in. And Vermonters are very proud of the Green Mountain Boys, and we pray for the safe return home. Madam President, one of the great accomplishments of this American democracy for the past 250 years, a legacy you and I are both proud of, is that the strong military we have serves under elected civilian leadership. Citizens volunteer to serve, accepting that they will be deployed at the will of the Commander-in-Chief, that they will bravely face all the perils required to defend our freedom. Madam President, the citizens who serve in the military have accepted their responsibility. The United States Senate should do the same, accept our responsibility. Under the Constitution, it's the elected leadership, including the United States Senate, that has the responsibility to carefully consider when and whether to commit our citizens to the obligations of war. Our country is now very deep into this war, the biggest in a generation. And yet, the United States Senate has not held a single hearing, has not had a single debate, has not demanded a full account from the executive as to the war in Iran. And now we understand the administration is preparing a $200 billion supplemental funding request for a war that has not even been explained, much less authorized. I will oppose this funding. I will oppose sleepwalking into a forever war. I will oppose funding a war where the president has presented no stated objectives or a coherent plan to achieve them. I will oppose funding a war where the president has proposed no way to pay for it other than to pile up more debt for our children and grandchildren. The question before us: does the U.S. end this war, or do we escalate? I oppose a war and funding a war that will make our country less safe and our citizens economically more vulnerable. This is at the heart of our sworn obligation to uphold the Constitution and fight for the interest of our constituents, of all Americans. This war makes us less safe, less prosperous. This war must end. I yield the floor.
Hey, how are you? Good, nice to see you again. All right, looking like we're seeing a moment of inactivity on the Senate floor. We'll get you back out to it if we see anybody else talking. By the way, this is the QR code where you can submit questions about the Middle East. We're going to be talking with Alon and Hal in the next hour or so. We're going to start off with Alon in about 20 minutes, and then Hal's going to be coming on in about an hour's time. If you want to submit your questions, you can scan the QR code on your screen. Once it takes you to the landing page, go to the Ask Now tab. If QR codes aren't your thing, you can go to livenowfox.com/connect. It'll take you to the very same place. Again, Turner, she's taking a look at a funding request from the Trump administration, really from the Pentagon, asking for hundreds of, actually, looked like we might have seen a little bit of activity on the Senate floor for a moment there. I just want to make sure that we don't miss anything. Does in fact look like they might be taking a quick break. So yeah, let's get out to Jillian Turner. She's tracking the latest on a new funding request coming from the Pentagon for the war in Iran.
The best defense is a good offense.
The Secretary of War says the U.S. military is definitively winning Operation Epic Fury and will do whatever it takes to finish the job, including reciprocal attacks on Iranian forces that target American embassies and consulates in the region.
We're not afraid to go after and kill anybody.
Today, President Trump took one option off the table.
No, I'm not putting troops anywhere. If I were, I certainly wouldn't tell you. But I'm not putting troops.
One U.S. priority, opening the Strait of Hormuz, where transit remains at a near standstill. Yesterday, over a 24-hour period, just 2 ships managed the crossing. By comparison, more than 100 transited the strait daily before the launch of Epic Fury. The slowdown comes as Iran launches missiles across the Gulf. What does it mean that they have that capability now, 3 weeks into the war?
We are continuing to hunt and find them and kill them, and we will continue to do so. So they still retain some capability. And we have layered defenses throughout the region.
With or without U.S. boots on the ground, the bill for taxpayers is high. The Pentagon says it's now in need of an extra $200 billion to continue the campaign through year's end. That's more than a fifth of the annual defense budget.
It takes money to kill bad guys.
The Pentagon's also beefing up support to allies in the region, submitting to Congress today approval of a potential foreign military sale of nearly $12.5 billion to Kuwait, Jordan, and the UAE. At the State Department, Jillian Turner, Fox News.
Mike Tobin has the latest, tracking the latest in the Middle East, how Iran is retaliating given recent strikes in the area. Here's Mike.
We are winning, and Iran is being decimated. Iran's missile and drone arsenal is being massively degraded and will be destroyed.
Just 20 days into the Israeli-American-led attack on Iran, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu claims Iran has never been weaker and that the Islamic Republic no longer can enrich uranium or make ballistic missiles.
I also see this war ending a lot faster than people think. I think you have to, in war, you have to grit your teeth.
His comments come as energy infrastructure in the region is under attack, from Saudi Arabia to Kuwait to Qatar. Iran is targeting oil and natural gas assets in the Gulf in retaliation for an Israeli attack on a major Iranian gas source.
As a result of this action, the fuel, energy, and gas infrastructures that are the source of the invasion will be burned and reduced to ashes.
Gulf state leaders are condemning the strikes as oil and gas prices soar. Qatar says it's open to diplomacy, but the Saudi foreign minister says whatever trust existed with Iran is shattered, and they may join the fight.
We have reserved the right to take military actions if deemed necessary.
Iran has long threatened destruction in the region, and experts say the world has been paying a risk tax because of that. Now, as the Iranian threat is realized and the world endures it, the current spike in oil prices could give way to long-term reduction.
You're going to see either a dramatically weakened and really revealing a paper tiger that Iran is, or regime change. But regardless, you're going to see a Strait of Hormuz that no longer passes on a dramatic tax to the global economy.
And for the first time ever, Israeli fighter planes fired on Iranian naval assets in the Caspian Sea with the intent of destroying all of Iran's military capability. The Israeli cabinet announced tonight that the war could last another couple of weeks. In Tel Aviv, Mike Tobin, Fox News.
Let's hit our first break of the hour. We'll be right back. Not every day we hear Benjamin Netanyahu giving a press conference in English. He did speak with the foreign press earlier today, giving some remarks, taking some questions from reporters about Operation Roaring Lion, as it's called from the Israeli perspective.
Welcome to the foreign press. First of all, I just want to say I'm alive, and you're all witnesses. And now that I dispatched this piece of fake news, I want to give you an update on Operation Roaring Lion. Under President Trump's visionary leadership, America and Israel are acting together in Iran with great determination and unprecedented strength. Operation Rising Lion is designed to remove the existential threats posed by the Ayatollah regime, the regime that has waged war against America and Israel and the people of Iran for 47 years. It chants death to America, death to Israel, and it delivers death to its own people. Our goals are three. One, removing the nuclear threat. Second, removing the ballistic missile threat, and removing both of these threats before they're buried deep underground and become immune from aerial attack. And third, this means creating the conditions for the Iranian people to grasp their freedom, to control their destiny. Today, the Ayatollah regime is not only attacking America, not only attacking Israel, not only attacking the Iranian people, it is attacking the entire Middle East and beyond. They've attacked civilians and American assets in Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, Oman, and they've even attacked through their proxies Cyprus and Europe. We've warned for decades that their ballistic missile program would be used to attack these targets far and wide, and if they're not stopped, that's just the beginning. The death cult in Iran is trying to blackmail the world by closing a key international maritime route, the Straits of Hormuz. It won't work. Israel is helping in its own way, and intel and other means, the American effort to open the Straits of Hormuz, rather. But I want to ask you to imagine how the Ayatollah regime would be able to blackmail the entire world if they had ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads. Just imagine what they would do. Look at what they're doing now and imagine what they would do if they had ballistic missiles, international range ballistic missiles, and nuclear-tipped warheads. Just imagine what a great threat that would be. So today, Israel and the United States are protecting America, Israel, the entire Middle East, but I venture to say the entire world. Despite the fake news that is unfortunately being spread since the start of the war 20 days ago, we are winning and Iran is being decimated. Iran's missile and drone arsenal is being massively degraded and will be destroyed. Hundreds of their launchers have been destroyed, their stockpiles of missiles are being hit hard, and so are the industries that produce them. That's important. In Rising Lion, we destroyed missiles and we destroyed a lot of the nuclear infrastructure. But what we're destroying now are the factories that produce the components to make these missiles and to make the nuclear weapons that they're trying to produce. We're wiping out their industrial base in a way that we didn't do before. Iran's air defenses have been rendered useless. Their navy is lying at the bottom of the sea. Today we hit the other part of their navy in the Caspian Sea. Their air force is nearly destroyed. Iran's command and control structure is in utter chaos. And I can tell you that there's still more work to do, and we're going to do it. And I want to close these opening remarks with one other fake news, and that is that Israel somehow dragged the U.S. into a conflict with Iran. Does anyone really think that someone can tell President Trump what to do? Come on. President Trump always makes his decisions on what he thinks is good for America, and may I add, I think what is also good for future generations. In this case, those interests are absolutely clear. and so is the clarity of our achievements. Together in close coordination with President Trump, the close coordination between America and Israel, our militaries, our intelligence services, we're achieving goals in lightning speed. But I want to say another word. It's been said that for 40 years, I've been saying that Iran is a danger to Israel and a danger to the world. That is true. You know who else said that? President Trump. 47 years ago, when the Iranian thugs took over the American embassy, he said how dangerous this regime is. In his first term in office, he didn't need any convincing. He said the Iranian nuclear deal was the worst deal that he'd ever seen, and he walked out of it. Right before his second term, before he was reelected, I went to see him in Mar-a-Lago. The first thing he said to me was, "Bibi, we've got to make sure that Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons." He said that to me. I didn't say it to him. He didn't need any convincing there either. Now, why did he say that? Because for more than 4 decades, this regime, as I said in the beginning of my remarks, is chanting death to Israel, death to America. But they say Israel is only the small Satan standing in their way. The great Satan is the United States of America. And these ideological fanatics, these lunatics, define their raison d'etre, their reason for being, as wiping out Western civilization in America that leads it. They have claimed the lives, they've maimed and wounded thousands of Americans in Iraq and Afghanistan. They killed the American Marines in Beirut. They bombed your embassies. They tried to assassinate the American president, Donald Trump, not once, but twice. Now they blackmail for oil. Just imagine what they would do, what they're capable of doing, if these lunatics had nuclear weapons and the means to deliver them to every American city and every European city and everywhere around the globe. This is a danger for the entire world. It's certainly a danger for Israel. It's certainly a danger for America. We see eye to eye on that. President Trump and I, Israel and America. But I think if people are honest, if leaders are honest, they would understand that we're not only fighting our fight, we're fighting their fight. I speak to dozens of world leaders. Dozens. They all know that. And privately, they all say that. They say that privately, but I say it publicly. The world owes a debt of deep indebtedness to President Trump for leading this effort to safeguard our future.
Thank
Questions?
you. We'll now take a few questions. The first question is from Zach Anders from Newsmax.
Mr. Prime Minister, Zach Anders, Newsmax.
So I'll just turn my microphone on here for a moment. We do have no audio coming through. You might be thinking that this is a glitch in the feed. It is not a glitch in the feed. The way this was broadcasted was they were muting the questions of the reporters. Zach here with Newsmax, we could not hear his audio coming through. So the audio presumably will pick up here in a moment. Once the question is asked, Netanyahu will answer his question directly. Again, this is the question from Newsmax being asked right now.
Want a transitional leader that will have a transition. You don't want to replace one Ayatollah with another. You don't want to replace Hitler with Himmler. So I think the question is, will the conditions be created for such a change? I think it's too early to say. And I think in the final account, as I said, it's up to the Iranian people to show that, to choose the moment and to rise to the moment. We can create the conditions, but they have to, they have to explode those conditions at a certain point. It is often said that you can't do revolutions from the air. That is true. You can't do it only from the air. You can do a lot of things from the air, and we're doing, but there has to be a ground component as well. There are many possibilities for this ground component, and I take the liberty of not sharing with you all those possibilities.
Would you recognize Pahlavi if the people keep chanting for him in the streets?
Well, I'm not going to say who specifically is going to be there, but I think he's been a force for good. He's been trying to get the people to unite for a transitional government, a democratic transitional government, or a moderate transitional government. I hope that it comes to being. I think it's too early to say.
Next question from Richard Engel from NBC News.
Good to see you again.
Well, I think we have concrete goals, how to do it, and that we want to, as I said, decimate the ballistic missile program, which we're doing, decimate the nuclear program, which we're doing. I think that those are goals that are achievable, but I'm not going to put a schedule or a stopwatch on it. I think we have goals that have to be achieved, and we're not counting the days. But I will say this canard that we drag the United States into it is not just a canard. It's ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. I mean, I think President Trump said it best, and I said it as well many times. There's always a danger in acting. But in conditions of existential threats, there's a much greater danger in not acting. What do you think would have happened if America did not act now? Just imagine what would have happened. In a few months' time, no more than a year, Khamenei, still alive, would have ordered the beginnings of the new nuclear program and the reconstructed ballistic missile program to move underground. Now, it'll take them a little time, maybe a few years, but you can't reach those programs. And they develop intercontinental ballistic missiles, okay? That means missiles that can hit Chicago and New York and Florida and Texas and California. Oh, but they don't have it yet. That's what people said. Right, let's wait. Well, just let them do it, Just wait and let them do it. You won't be able to do it. It's the last moment. No, it takes a little time. I mean, you had a few months to prevent them from doing it and to just decimate these industries and perhaps achieve this transitional government in Iran. So you sit back and you say, well, it's not going to happen in the next Thursday, so let's not act. I tell you that there's enormous risk in not acting, much greater risk than acting. And if you think that the oil markets are in trouble today, think of Iran with nuclear weapons and the means to deliver them. Then think of the blackmail that you would endure.
I didn't exactly ask, however.
Okay, we're going to go to the next question.
No, I think it's only fair. This is a serious subject.
What is the question?
One question for
Go ahead.
You don't have a lot of time. This is important.
Go ahead, ask.
Of course, but you have questions. There are oil fields around the world that are burning. Gas prices are going up. The war is popular here in Israel. Is not popular with many Americans. My question was, how do you see this ending? Not why, not even when. What do you imagine the day after?
Well, we have achievable goals, and I'm not going to speak about the full battle plans that we have with the United States. We're well coordinated with them. I will say this, that once we achieve our goals, then I have argued, I think, and Americans understand this very well, because we're real partners. I think that what has to be done is to have alternative routes. Instead of going through the choke points of the Hormuz Straits and the Bab el-Mandeb Straits, in order to have the flow of oil, just have oil pipelines, gas pipelines, going west through the Arabian Peninsula, right up to Israel, right up to our Mediterranean ports, and you've just done away with the choke points for forever. That is definitely possible. So I see that as a real change that will follow this war. But I also see this war ending a lot faster than people think. I think you have to, in war, you have to grit your teeth. Churchill said that democracies suffer from the slumber of democracies, as he called it. And they only wake up, he said, they may wake up only when they hear the gong, the jarring gong of danger, is the way he put it. Well, you're hearing the jarring gong of danger. The jarring gong of danger is Iran gets nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles. That's not a jarring gong. That is an apocalypse. Don't let it happen. And the function of leaders is to stand and tell people the truth, even when things are uncomfortable. That's what you have to do. And you don't always see the danger in time. But leaders are tasked with the task of seeing danger in time and acting on it. And I hope that in time, people will see the wisdom and the courage of President Trump's decision and his leadership, and the fact that we're working together. America is not fighting for Israel. America is fighting with Israel for a common goal, to protect our future, to protect civilization against these barbarians.
Netanyahu speaking earlier today. It's time for us here at Live Now to take a quick commercial break. On the other side, discussing more on the Middle East. We'll be right back. All right, you're watching Live Now. I'm Austin Westfall. Let's bring in Professor Alon Burstein. He's here. He's the host of the Israel-Palestine Report. I'm going to get straight into the audience questions today. Alon, we've been having the viewers send these in. We got the first one up from Danny in Delaware saying, do you believe Hegseth and or Trump underestimated Iranian firepower and resolve?
Good to see you, Austin. And as always, good questions from the audience. I mean, it's a matter of speculation because one of the things that Trump does exceedingly well is always represent things as though that's exactly how I wanted it to be. By now it's very, very obvious that in June of 2025, during the 12-day war, neither Israel nor the United States really believed that they had destroyed the nuclear capabilities of Iran, but Trump and Netanyahu were both saying, yes, it's entirely destroyed, because that's how they wanted to present it. So it's difficult to know if, in fact, when they both say, this is what I expected, this is how we thought it would be, if that is in fact what they thought or not. I will say that when it comes to preparations for the Iranian retaliations, it does seem like the United States has been taken by surprise. And I think they were taken by surprise by more than one thing. First of all, they were taken by surprise by the fact that Iran was willing to actually carry through on their threats, both of blocking the Straits of Hormuz and at retaliating at the entire region. Iran always said they are going to attack basically every other country in the region that has any relations with the United States. But no one necessarily believed them. And I think that took them by surprise. It certainly took those other countries by surprise that are now coming to the United States and complaining, saying, what have you gotten us into? So that's one element of the surprise. The second element is that Iran was willing to actually block the Straits of Hormuz, and they are taking a hit with that. They're also crippling their own economy. They're investing a lot of their own effort into blocking the Straits of Hormuz, but they're willing to do it. And that, I think, is another level of surprise. The third level appears to be something that has both taken by surprise and frustrated both Israel and the United States, and that is that we are still not seeing the protesters in Iran take to the streets. Very, very likely this is either as a result of ongoing bombings and very difficult to convince people to go out and protest in favor of the side that is bombing you, or it is a result of the ongoing repression. At the first week, there was speculation that the people were really waiting for either the exiled son of the Shah, the last king of Iran, or the United States or Israel to actually call them out to the streets. By now, they are openly calling the people out to the streets. It's not happening. It's not happening, at least yet. Maybe it will still. But so far, it's not happening, and we are seeing growing signs of frustration, but I dare say also surprise. I think in Israel especially, there was this expectation that with the opening hit and the assassination of Ali Khamenei, this will be the moment people take to the streets. It hasn't happened. So Israel is now escalating and targeting the different police mechanisms of the Basij and their repressive mechanisms. Nonetheless, it's not happening, and I think that is another level that has caught the U.S. and Israel by surprise and has left them in a place where they're right now not sure how to carry forth. Reuters reported that Trump is considering sending troops to Iran. Trump said he's not going to, but the situation right now is very stuck. So I think they were surprised by all those things. It doesn't mean that they didn't know that Iran has that type of firepower and capability, but that they're willing to use it, they're willing to look at this as, okay, then, scorched earth with regards to the Gulf. That, I think, is the level that caught them by surprise.
It was Reuters' Phil Stewart that reported that, and we interviewed him earlier on in the broadcast. For anybody that wants to watch that full interview, it's on livenowfox.com and our YouTube channel. Malone, you and I were talking yesterday about South Pars. This is this massive oil field. It's the largest in the world, in fact. A piece of it, the Iranians operate it. The other piece of it, over the border, the Qataris operate it. Just after you and I got off the air last night, we saw President Trump react to that, and then today, Netanyahu speaking about it. If you could sum up what we've heard from the Americans and the Israelis on that strike yesterday.
So really what we've seen is full circle in terms of how this goes. So just to position for people, this is an interactive map of what's going on in Iran. The red dots are U.S. and Israeli strikes, and the more yellow dots are Iranian retaliations. And what we're talking about is a natural gas field, the largest in the world, actually, that is in this area over here, that is between Iran and Qatar. And some of it is in Iranian space, some of it is in Qatari space, and both of them use it as a main part of their economy. Now, Israel carried out an airstrike. We're seeing that over here. Israel carried out an airstrike against that natural gas fields and the refineries in there. And what we've seen is a full circle with regards to how this is being treated by Israel and the United States. Initially, Israel said the United States knew about this in advance. They knew that we carried this out, and it was done in cooperation and coordination with them. And this was anywhere from not denied in the United States to confirmed by different US officials. Then, shortly after, Iran made good on their threat, like we said before, and carried out a counterstrike targeting Qatar's, what's known as almost the refinery city that Qatar has. That is their main gas mining facilities, and Qatar really thrives, their economy lives on this natural gas that they then process and export to the world. Qatar carried out a missile strike there, and what we have since learned is that Qatar went, I don't use the term went nuclear in the war, it's a little bit contentious to use that term, got furious at that situation. What happened then? The series of events, within 2 hours, the United States, President Trump himself, puts out a statement, a very, very interesting statement, in which he says Israel carried out the attack against the gas fields. We didn't know about it. He then adds almost a defense mechanism for Iran and says Iran didn't know that we did not approve that. And therefore, when Iran carried out the attack against Qatar, they thought that they were attacking against us, and they were wrong. We're willing to let that go. If they don't attack again, there will be no more attacks. And he assures that Israel will not carry out any more attacks against the gas fields. Why am I saying that's critically important? This is very, very reminiscent of September 2025. There's negotiations happening between Israel and Hamas. Those negotiations are happening with Qatar as one of the lead mediators. Israel carries out an assassination attempt. F-15s fire missiles at Doha, trying to kill the Hamas leadership. Qatar goes crazy. They talk to Trump. Trump then puts out a statement explaining that Israel will never do this again, that the United States did not know about this. And then Qatar gets a defense pact with the United States, much more than Israel, much more than anyone. They now have a defense pact, mutual defense. An attack against Qatar is an attack against the United States. And why do I say full circle? Because that was not even enough. Even after that, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, unlike Trump, unlike Hegseth, he has not held press conferences. He's held exactly one press conference in the last 3 weeks for the Israeli media. All of a sudden today, it became very important for him to hold a press conference for the United States media, for international media, and he says there in English repeatedly, yes, in fact, the United States did not know about this. This was all us. This was all us. Very, very clear to me he's doing this under orders from Trump. Trump very obviously got angry phone calls from Qatar, was furious at Israel for doing this. Israel is standing by in saying, Israeli military officials, in saying that this was coordinated with the United States. There's all kinds of rumors that Steve Witkoff is the one that told Trump this was very bad. Let's go and say we had nothing to do with it. But at this point, one of the things that we have seen is this is the first public crack in the foundation of the joint attacks of Israel and the United States. There were even reports today that they've set up a committee to try to coordinate future attacks to make sure that this doesn't happen again. That signifies how fragile this has become all of a sudden. Up until now, everything was coordinated. But this attack, the minute Qatar went to the United States and got angry, the United States very, very quickly shifted the blame onto Israel and said, we knew nothing about this. And Netanyahu himself came up in English several times saying, yes, I back up what Trump said. This was all us, and we will not do it again, which is really a scolding from Trump to Netanyahu with regards to this attack.
Help us understand why not only Gulf states, but a number of states in the Middle East, they had such a visceral reaction to this natural gas field being struck. Can you just underline why this specific area is so important to not only the Gulf, but the wider region?
The world.
Yeah.
So really, the thing to remember here is that this entire war and really all of these various things in the Middle East are always about signaling to each other, how far are you willing to go? You know, we saw this if we look at the pattern of conflict between Iran and Israel, right? They started firing at each other, not through proxies, but directly firing at each other back in April of then 2024. There was the first attacks between them, and then they fired missiles, they carried out airstrikes, and we were done. And then there was a bit of an escalation, and then a bit of an escalation, and we were done. And it's always a question of how far are you willing to escalate? Right now, the level of escalation is Iran is firing drones and ballistic missiles, and the United States and Israel are carrying out airstrikes. But for example, it hasn't gone to major commando operations. Iran hasn't tried to send commando units to invade Kuwait City and plant explosives, or in Iraq or in Qatar. And the United States and Israel haven't tried to do that. That, for example, would be another escalation. It's always about signaling to one another, we're at war, but these are the rules of the game. This is where we are willing to do what we are not willing to do. And one of the things that is really part of these unwritten rules, or as often we call it, sort of like, well, no, never mind the jargon. I'm just getting sidetracked. One of the things about that is really attacking resources, attacking oil fields, attacking gas fields, even though until now, Iran has signaled it's willing to go even further. It's willing to attack refineries and willing to escalate to that level. It hasn't been all-out war on the oil production facilities. In the Middle East, even when we've had wars between Iran and Iraq, even when we've had wars between Iraq and Kuwait, even when we've had a lot of regional wars, there tends to be an unspoken rule, tacit agreements, what we call, that you do not go all out and just burn to the ground oil fields or gas fields because everyone's dependent on them. And one of the things Iran has said is if we feel that our back is against the wall, either because there's a ground invasion, or if you attack our natural resource fields, we will retaliate against them. And again, Iran sent a total of 5 missiles to Qatar. It was not 150 missiles. That's also them saying, don't play with us. You want to escalate, we'll escalate. They didn't try to destroy Qatar's refinery city. They just tried to say, we're willing to do that. But the entire Gulf is terrified. The entire Gulf is terrified because if this escalates a step further, then this could escalate a step further. And one more thing I'll say about that. Similarly, Israel does not have nearly as big natural resources as these Gulf states, but it does have big power plants and refineries in Haifa, in this area over here. And wouldn't you know, by quote unquote sheer coincidence, a day after Israel carried out that strike against the gas fields, today there were several missiles targeting the power plants in Haifa, several direct hits, nothing that was too critically damaged. But once again, it wasn't 100 missiles. It was 2. Iran sending a signal back saying, if you push this, we will push that. The Gulf states are terrified because if Iran does decide, all right, scorched earth policy, we will fire everything we have at the refineries in Kuwait City, at the gas fields in Qatar, at the oil fields in Saudi Arabia, that would burn the Middle East up to the ground and send the world into a spiral. And that's why these countries are terrified, and they're mostly terrified that Israel is playing the game, because Israel has less to lose, so to speak, from that than these other countries, and that's where Qatar seemingly got very angry.
Yeah. Adam has this question about the Gulf states. How likely is it that other Gulf nations will join the U.S. and Israeli forces in this conflict alone?
So Trump seems to have expected that the Gulf states would likely join. He called upon them to join. He's also called a lot of NATO partners to join, and no one really has yet. Once again, I'll take this back to those tacit agreements. It's part of these things of these countries right now are just absorbing. They're just absorbing from Iran, and they're doing this almost, quote unquote, accepting the indictment saying you host U.S. troops in your territory, the United States is fighting us, therefore you're a target. But the level to which you are a target is not the level to which you could be if you get actively involved in attacking us. And they just want to stay away from it. They want to stay away from it. What are the chances that they would get involved? I think they desperately want to not get involved. If things continue to escalate further, it may come to the point that they have to get involved for 2 reasons. One, it may be that Trump himself says, you know what? We are now in the position where we're protecting you very much from Iran's retaliations. You have to actually actively get involved. And we saw today that Trump is pushing a very, very big aid package towards Kuwait and the United Arab Emirates and Qatar and Bahrain. So that may be part of him saying, we are giving you now our military aid. You need to get involved. Another reason may actually be internal. The populations in these countries are not seeking war with Iran. They want stability. They want to get rich off of oil profits. They're not seeking war. But at some point also a leadership, just like in the United States, just like in Israel, just like in Europe, any country that's attacked, at one point or another, the politicians are going to feel, okay, I need to do something about this. There's only so much I can say. We're being attacked, but I just don't want to get involved, right? Imagine the United States, Pearl Harbor. Yeah, that happened, but, we don't want to get involved. A politician can't really survive not getting involved that much. So far, the countries are doing very well at convincing their internal populations at saying it's in our interest to not get involved. Saudi Arabia just launched a very, very interesting thing where every citizen in Saudi Arabia now can download an app where they will report live when there is a drone or missile attack so that the air defense of Saudi Arabia, which are not as advanced as the United States or Israel, can retaliate immediately. So they're trying to get everyone to feel that they're part of the national program of defending the country, but they're also doing a good job of convincing them so far, but it's in our interest to not get involved. I'm not sure how long that can last, though. If the escalations from Iran happen further and more civilians are killed in the Gulf countries, internal pressures alongside external ones may push them towards reaction.
James asking, how prepared is the U.S. alliance network for a broader Middle East conflict? And are current partnerships strong enough to handle a multi-front escalation? Some big questions there alone. Are we starting to see any signs that the U.S.'s NATO allies, for example, are willing to send military hardware in order to defend even the Strait of Hormuz at this time?
So most of these, it's a great question, but it is very complicated. I'll start with NATO, like you suggested. Most of the NATO partners so far seem to be indicating that they're not interested in coming to defend the Strait of Hormuz for two reasons. And this is, again, from internal communiques in different countries. One, they're not actually sure that there's a viable plan to do that. And it's important to understand, it's impossible to offer complete defense in the Straits of Hormuz. Iran has such a long coast along the Straits, and all it would take is 5 ballistic missiles or 10 drones that are fired at a ship, and you can't protect every single inch of the sky and every single ship. And remember, these oil tankers, if they get hit, it's massive oil spills. It's physically, so a lot of these countries are estimating, not possible without boots on the ground to actually push Iranian forces back from the coast. So that's one reason. A second reason that is being echoed in various different countries, in France, the United Kingdom, is saying they would be willing to do so if they actually felt that this war has an agenda. They're doing so until it ends in a certain way. But at this point, even Secretary of War Pete Hegseth is saying it'll end when Trump says it ends. So these countries are now less willing to commit. I remind everyone that in the first days of the war, the United Kingdom and France both said that they were going to send aircraft carriers to the region. And Trump got angry and said, we don't need that after we've already won, because he was saying then that we've already won. Now he's asking for their help, but now they're saying, well, we thought this was going to be something that lasts a couple of days. It's now lasting who knows how long. We're not necessarily willing to do that. So NATO, pretty hesitant at this point when it comes to Straits of Hormuz, both because of feasibility and because of questions of how long this is going to last. The other countries in the region, how prepared are they? The different alliances in the Middle East are constantly shifting. And it's going to be way too complicated to try to get into all the ins and outs. But just as an example, if we go back 10 years, there was a broad Middle Eastern alliance against Qatar. Saudi Arabia led a group of Arab countries, including Syria, including Iraq, including Bahrain, including the United Arab Emirates, all to boycott Qatar and try to suffocate it, punishing them for what they thought was incitement against them in Al Jazeera and also for promoting international terrorism. Here we are now, close to 10 years later, Qatar is the main ally of most of these countries, and now there's strife between Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates over what's happening in Somalia and Ethiopia and Yemen. And again, I'm not going to get into all these intricacies, but I'll say that the alliance networks in the Middle East are very fragile. They're constantly shifting. What is helping them, ironically, is a common enemy. So Iran right now is bringing everyone together because right now, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Iraq, they're all on the same side at the moment fighting Iran. So if this did escalate to a larger all-out war, chances are all that bad blood that exists between the different countries may die down in exchange for I'd give way for a war with Iran. But there is one thing that I need to point out, and I'll point this out again and again. Iran has a very, very complicated topography. It has mountainous ridges that go across its different borders. And at this point, all this is happening with attacks from the sky. If it does go to regional all-out war, at some point, someone's going to have to be willing to invade Iran with boots on the ground. I'm not advocating and saying this should happen. I'm saying if there was an attempt to end this militarily, what Trump initially said, unconditional surrender, we don't really have unconditional surrenders in the last, since World War II, basically, without a country being completely occupied by force. And the only country that could realistically do that even is the United States, and that's also not 100% sure that they could in an easy way, but none of these other countries would have that capability. Iran's a big country, it has an advanced military, and the topography is very difficult. So even if this continues to spiral and the entire Middle East goes up in flames, chances are what we're going to see is just a much more intense version of what we're seeing now. We're just going to see many more missiles, many more drones, many more airstrikes, many more Navy attacks. We're not necessarily going to see World War III of occupying another country unless the United States is willing to commit to boots on the ground. I think that would be very difficult for Trump to do. We are coming closer and closer to the midterms as the weeks go by. And oil prices, gas prices, right now the United States is a little bit more shielded from that. In Europe, the prices have already gone up about 35%, but it's going to hit the United States eventually. It's hitting the stock markets already.
People are seeing Karg Island on their screen right now. We were talking about Karg last week. The reason why we're asking about it right now is because our friend A in Kansas is asking, can the U.S. legally take and own Karg Island and keep it for its own oil usage? And the reason why I wanted to bring this in right now alone is because this is sort of mixed in with the idea that Reuters is reporting on and many other news outlets are reporting on, that there's at least discussion in the background about the potential of deploying more troops to the region. Unclear to us if a deployment were to happen, would there be boots on the ground on the coast of Iran? Would it be on an island like Karg? But to address A's question directly, the question is, can the U.S. legally take and own the island and keep it for its own usage?
It's a great question. When it comes to international law, because the question is legally, when it comes to international law, very often I say international law and I get a lot of comments back on my own YouTube channel, people saying, but who cares about international law? No one follows it. True, maybe yes, maybe no. But if the question is what is the legality, so first of all, I'll say I'm answering what's legal. That doesn't mean that I'm saying that anyone follows it or that's what should be. So putting that out there. When it comes to questions of international legality, in war, you are allowed to occupy a territory. According to international law, for the Fourth Geneva Convention and Protocol 1, you are allowed to occupy another area, especially if that area is used for military purposes, as Karg Island was. However, when it comes to the specifics of legality, according to the Fourth Geneva Convention, which the United States is a party to, you are not allowed to use the natural resources of that area for your own personal gain. You technically are allowed to use that for the gain of the local population. So for example, this doesn't really apply to Karg Island, but for example, if the United States were to take over Karg Island and then were to also occupy part of Iran, technically, if we go by the legalities of international law, the United States would be allowed to use the oil in Karg and refineries and processes through Karg Island in order to set up facilities, improve the infrastructure, rebuild parts of Iran that it controls. That would be the legal mechanism that the United States could do. Otherwise, by international law, no, you would not be allowed to. You would be allowed to occupy Karg Island, even if it's for reasons of economic pressure, but you would not be allowed to use the oil in any way. That said, by international law, you're also not allowed to invade another country in order with your commando units in order to kidnap their president. The United States did that in Venezuela. So sometimes I'll say very often, we have a lot of countries committing to facts on the ground, and then international law comes back and says, were you allowed, were you not allowed, but by then it's a fact, and usually by then already we've moved on. So I'm not saying that this wouldn't happen, I'm not saying it couldn't happen. Technically, in answer to the question, it would not be legal by international standards. I'll say even more than that, it's not practical. If the United States were to take over Karg Island and try to then utilize the oil and export it, that's a mechanism that requires a lot of investments, time, energy. And if the United States can export oil from Kharg Island through the Straits of Hormuz, then they can secure the Straits of Hormuz, and the whole situation that we're facing right now is a little bit over. So legally, it's a problem, but I'd say more practically, any objective in taking over Kharg Island would be to stop Iran from refining oil and stop Iran from then selling oil, because Iran sells lots of oil, not only through the Straits of Hormuz, also to Iraq, also to other neighboring countries over land. So that would really be the aim. I doubt the United States would have any tangible plan of actually utilizing the refineries in Kharg Island in order to produce oil and export it somehow through Hormuz at this point.
Alone, how can people find your content and your courses? I know you put a video out recently talking about Iran's proxies.
So look me up on YouTube, Israel-Palestine Report, or you can go to my website at alonburstein.com, also alonburstein.com/courses. Lots and lots of content going on, uploading constantly about the Middle East, about Lebanon, about Israel, about Iran, all these various different things. Just yesterday or 2 days ago, like Austin said, I put up a video talking about who Iran's proxies are. One of the goals the United States set for the war is stopping Iran's proxies. So what's the difference between Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis? All that good stuff. If you're interested in the Middle East, happy to see anyone there. Israel-Palestine Report, primarily on YouTube.
Good to see you. Have a good night.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Let's hit a quick break. Hal Kemper joining us in a moment. Welcome back. We are continuing to track the U.S. and Israel as they continue to hit targets in Iran, aiming to dismantle their infrastructure. We are hearing that they've struck over 7,800 targets so far, performed over 8,000 combat flights, and damaged or destroyed over 120 Iranian vessels. Retired Marine Intelligence Officer, National Security Analyst, and the host of the Strat podcast, Hal Kemper, here with us tonight. Hal, some news today about an F-35 fighter jet. I'm reading some reporting here. There was an emergency landing with a U.S. F-35 fighter jet. It was flying a combat mission over Iran, and then it had to make an emergency landing. The pilot, according to the U.S. military, is in stable condition. CNN says that the jet was believed to be hit by Iranian fire. If that's the case, would this be the first time that a U.S. fighter jet was hit in the sky amid this war?
As far as I can tell, it's the very first time. It hasn't happened. In fact, I have been really surprised that we haven't had more aviation mishaps or actually U.S. aircraft or for that matter, Israeli aircraft come under fire. Early into this thing, we jointly declared air superiority over most of Iran. And then that quickly matriculated into the term air dominance, which means that we dominate the airspace. But it's not the same thing as air supremacy, which means basically we can fly anywhere we want uncontested. And you saw today what appears to be that an F-35, a stealth fighter, okay, with all the stealth systems and all the stealth stuff that's available to it, was presumably targeted and sustained damage. And it sounds like the pilot was injured as well. So it just kind of, it's a cautionary tale. And by the way, if we can go for another few weeks and we don't have another thing like this, that will be just amazing in the annals of warfare. But it's a dangerous business, and these things do happen.
A question coming in from Mark in Grand Junction. What is the extent of the damage taken by U.S. bases, infrastructure, planes, ships, etc.? How many U.S. assets has Iran hit? And Hal, I don't expect you to have any precise numbers. With time, we will presumably learn a little bit more about the scope of damage that has been done. But this question from Mark made me think about the initial strike that killed a number of service members in Kuwait. Are there still questions looming about how that played out?
Well, that's going to be investigated fully. And